Texas Hill Country, April 1871. The gunshots cracked through the cedar trees like thunder, and the scream that followed twisted something deep in Pierce Kellan's chest. He kicked his gelding hard and charged down the rocky trail, rifle slung across his back, dust flaring behind him. The sound had come from the road that ran east toward Blanco, where the stage came through twice a week. He had not expected trouble today. He was just checking fence lines and cattle, but trouble had a way of finding him since the war ended. When he broke through the brush and saw the overturned stagecoach, he did not hesitate. Two riders with bandanas over their faces were yanking a woman down from the busted door. One of them had a pistol aimed at her head. Another man lay slumped nearby, blood soaking through his chest, probably the driver. The strongbox was already cracked open. Pierce raised his rifle. "Let her go." The bandits turned, startled, and one fired. Dirt exploded near Pierce's boot. He dropped to a knee, aimed, and fired back. The man jerked and collapsed with a grunt. The second bandit took off on horseback. Pierce sprinted forward, heart pounding, and caught the woman by the arm before she could fall. She was trembling, her dress torn at the shoulder, her travel bonnet dangling from a ribbon. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto his. "You are all right now," he said, steadying her. "You are safe." She tried to speak, but no sound came. He could see she was trying to hold herself together, but her hands were shaking too hard. "Let us get you out of here first," he said, lifting her up onto his horse. "Can you ride?" She nodded, barely. He swung up behind her, wrapped one arm around her waist, and kicked the gelding into a gallop. He did not stop until they reached his ranch house, tucked between the limestone hills, a mile off the main road. By the time he helped her down and into the cabin, her breathing had slowed, but her hands still shook. He poured her water, then crouched beside her at the hearth. "I am Pierce Kellan," he said gently. "You are safe now. What is your name?" She hesitated, then looked up at him. "Vera Roselyn." Her voice was soft but clear. She looked younger than he had first thought, maybe 24 or 25. Dark hair in a long braid, eyes like storm clouds. "I was on my way to Eden," she said, "to meet my intended. I answered a mail order ad. He was supposed to meet me at the station in Blanco." Pierce frowned. "Do you know his name?" "Thomas Weller." Her lips trembled when she said it. "I have never met him. Just letters." Pierce nodded slowly. "You were lucky I was nearby." Vera's eyes dropped. "That man you shot, he would have killed me." "Yes," Pierce said. "He would have." He stood and moved to the window, jaw tight. After a moment he added, "You can stay here for now. I will ride to town in the morning. Send word to the sheriff." Vera nodded, eyes still fixed on the fire. That night she barely spoke. Pierce brought her stew, gave her the bed, and took the floor by the hearth. He watched her as the light faded, saw the way she kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if holding something in. The next morning, she was sitting on the porch, wrapped in one of his blankets, watching the sun rise over the hills. "Thank you," she said quietly as he stepped outside. He gave a nod. "You are welcome. I will not be a burden," she added. "I can help with chores." "You are not a burden," he said. "You are a guest." She gave a small smile, but it faded fast. "I will not be going to Eden. You do not have to explain." But she did anyway, voice tight. "I lied in the letters. Not about everything. Just parts." Pierce studied her face. "What parts?" She looked away. "I am not a schoolteacher. I never went to school, not past 12. I worked in a laundry in St. Louis. I wanted something better." He waited. Her hands twisted in her lap. "And I have a child." Pierce blinked. "A son," she whispered. "His name is Nolan. He is 4. I had to leave him behind with a woman I trusted just until I could find steady work. I was going to send for him once I got settled. Pierce stepped closer. Why did you not bring him with you? Her voice cracked. Because I had no money. I barely had enough for the train fare. I thought if I could just get to Eden, if this man was decent, maybe I could make a home for us. It hit him then how much fear she had been carrying, not just from the attack, but from months of planning, risking everything. Vera was not just running from something. She was running toward hope. Pierce sat beside her. Where is he? Your boy. In St. Louis. With a widow named Mrs. Halbert. She is kind, but she cannot keep him for long. Pierce nodded slowly. We will get him. Vera's eyes filled. Why are you being so kind? He looked at her, steady. Because you deserve it. She looked away, blinking hard. Over the next 3 days, Vera stayed. She cooked, helped tend the horses, and swept the porch like it was her own. She was quiet, but sharp. She watched the land, asked questions, learned fast. And Pierce found himself watching her more than he meant to. On the 4th evening, she was gathering eggs when he came up behind her. You are doing well with the hens. She smiled. They are easier than people. That they are. They stood there, quiet for a moment. The wind rustled through the oaks. Then she turned to him. Pierce. Why are you alone out here? He looked at her, surprised. I suppose I got used to it. You fought in the war? Yes. Lost a brother. Came home to an empty house. She nodded, soft. I am sorry. He looked at her. You talk like someone who knows loss. I do. She did not say more. She did not need to. That night, after supper, she stood by the hearth and looked at him. Do you mean it? That you will help me bring Nolan here? Pierce crossed the room and took her hand. I do. She looked up at him, and for a long second, neither of them moved. Then she stepped closer. And he kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not wild. It was quiet, steady, and full of all the things neither of them had said yet. When they broke apart, Vera's hand was on his chest, her breath soft against his neck. I have not felt safe in a long time, she whispered. You are now, he said. And he meant it. The letter to St. Louis was sent by courier before the week was out. Pierce knew a man in Blanco who handled freight and correspondence, and he paid him in advance to ensure it reached the right hands. It would take time, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before they could expect a reply, but Vera's eyes held something steadier after the letter was gone, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. She stopped flinching at every noise in the woods. By the 2nd week, she had taken to mending tack in the shade of the cottonwood that leaned over the well. Pierce caught her there one afternoon, threading a fresh strip of leather through a stirrup strap, her face shaded by her bonnet, brow furrowed in concentration. You ever work with horses? He asked, crouching to check the tension she'd set. No, she said, tugging the strap a little tighter. But I watched the stableman back in Missouri. He'd talk while he worked. I remembered what he said. Pierce tested the knot she'd tied. You've got a good hand. She smiled at that, not a soft smile this time, but a proud one, straight-backed and sure. He leaned against the well post, arms folded. You think you'd stay, once your boy's here? Her hands paused. You want me to? I'd like to know what you want. She set the strap down and looked up. I want to work. I want Nolan to have a bed that's his. I want to wake up somewhere I don't have to count coins before I breathe. Pierce nodded, slow. There's land here. More than I can work alone. She stood, brushing her hands off on her skirt. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a place. If you want it. Vera looked at him a long moment, then stepped closer. You always this generous with strangers? No, he said. Only with you. Her mouth parted like she might say something more, but she didn't. She just nodded, eyes steady, and went back to coiling the leather. That night, the wind came up strong from the west, rattling the shutters and sweeping dust up against the porch. Pierce lit the lantern and checked the barn doors before turning back. Inside, Vera had pulled the quilt tighter over the bed and was folding away the laundry she'd brought in earlier. You ever think about going back? She asked, not looking up. To where? He said. Back east. Or wherever you came from. Before the war. Pierce shook his head. There's nothing left behind me worth chasing. Vera didn't answer right away. Then, still folding, she said, My father was a blacksmith. He died in a fire when I was 12. My mother followed 2 years later. Fever. Pierce leaned against the doorframe, listening. I was taken in by a woman who ran a sewing room. She worked us long and hard. Said she was doing us a kindness, keeping us from the streets. Vera's hands stilled on a shirt. When I was 17, I married a man who drank every dollar he earned and hit me when he couldn't find more. Pierce straightened. He died in a brawl, she said. No one wept. I was already carrying Nolan by then. She looked at him finally. That's the part one never wrote in the letters. You don't owe anyone shame, Pierce said quietly. I didn't want pity. You won't get it from me. She stepped toward him. Then what will I get? Pierce closed the last of the space between them. Whatever you're ready to accept. Vera reached up then, fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. I'm not used to a man who waits. You've earned waiting, he said. You've earned more than that. Her hand stayed there a long moment before she pulled back. Let's see if the letter comes first. The days turned warmer after that. The mesquites bloomed and the air filled with the dust of cattle moving across distant trails. Vera took to riding out with Pierce in the mornings, sitting the saddle with quiet confidence, her braid tucked up under the hat he'd given her. She didn't chatter. She listened. Asked about fence line, knots and water rights and what to do if coyotes got too close to the barn. One morning, while mending a break in the wire near the creek, she asked, Do you think Nolan'll like it here? He'll have space to run. Shade to sit in. A mother who knows how to patch a stirrup strap. Pierce looked over. He'll be fine. She smiled, but it was tighter than before. What if he don't remember me? What if he's changed? He's 4, Pierce said. He hasn't changed so much he won't know his own blood. Vera nodded, but he could see the worry hadn't let go. That evening, she brought out a small parcel wrapped in linen, tied with twine. She set it on the table between them without a word. Pierce untied it slowly. Inside was a worn baby shoe, the leather soft with use, the stitching frayed. My mother made those, she said. Passed them down to me. I kept one for luck. Pierce touched the edge of the tiny sole. You want to send it to him? No, she said. I want it here. Waiting. Pierce folded the linen back over the shoe and tied it again. Then we'll keep it safe. She met his eyes across the table. You really think the woman still got him? If she said she would, I believe her. I didn't pay her, Vera said. She was just kind. Then we trust her kindness. Vera nodded. I'm trying. Pierce stood, crossed the room, and took her hand. You don't have to try alone. She closed her fingers around his. Outside, the wind had gone still. The hills were quiet except for the low hum of evening insects, and the last of the sun caught on the rim of her hair like firelight. The reply came just after supper on the 25th day. Pierce found the envelope in the saddlebag where the Blanco courier left it, tucked between a folded feed invoice and a small sack of coffee beans. The handwriting was unfamiliar, looped and uneven, but the name on the front was unmistakable. He didn't read it first. He brought it to her. Vera was on the porch, peeling potatoes with a small paring knife, her skirt hem dusted from the garden. When he handed her the letter, her fingers stilled. She stared at the paper like it might vanish if she blinked. Is it from her? She asked. Only one way to know. Vera opened it slowly, careful not to tear the page. Her lips moved as she read, silent at first. Then her breath hitched. She says he's well, she murmured. She says he asks after me every morning, that he's grown taller, eating everything she puts in front of him. Pierce waited. She'll bring him as far as Fort Worth next month. She can't come farther, her own family's taken ill, but she's arranged for him to travel with a neighbor from there to San Antonio. Vera looked up. We'd need to meet him at the depot. We will, Pierce said. We'll leave 3 days early. Give the horses time to rest. Vera folded the letter with care, smoothing the edges before tucking it into her apron. She packed his blue wool coat, said he still refuses to wear anything but that. Pierce smiled. Sounds like he's got your mind. He's got his father's jaw, she said. And his temper, sometimes. But he laughs easy. The knife she'd been using lay forgotten beside the bowl. She picked it up again, but her hands weren't steady. "You don't have to finish those tonight," Pierce said. "I do," she said. "He'll be hungry." There was no arguing that. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Vera cut and hemmed a shirt she'd found stored away in a trunk, stitching it smaller to fit a child's frame. She lined a basket with rags and began tucking in bits of dried fruit and hard biscuits. Pierce sanded and re-latched the old buggy stored behind the barn, inspecting each wheel like a blacksmith at a forge. On the evening before their departure, Vera stood in the doorway of the barn where he was oiling the harness. "He doesn't know you," she said. Pierce didn't look up. "He will. You're not afraid of that?" "I'm not afraid of a boy who wants his mother." Vera stepped closer, her voice lower now. "He's never had a man in his life. Not really. I don't know what that'll do to him." Pierce ran the cloth over the buckle once more. "I'm not here to replace anything. I'm here to be steady." She watched him, the lantern light drawing gold across her jaw, her throat, the edge of her collarbone. "What would you have done?" she asked. "If I hadn't told you about him?" Pierce set down the cloth. "Waited. Until you did." She nodded once, then leaned against the stall wall. "Back in St. Louis, I used to lie awake at night, imagining what kind of life I'd have if I ever got out. I never pictured this. Chickens and mending and a man who doesn't shout." He stepped to her, close enough that he could smell the faint trace of cedar in her hair. "What do you picture now?" She didn't answer right away. A house with 2 chairs on the porch. A boy chasing fireflies. A man who keeps his promises. Pierce reached for her hand. "You'll have all that." She let out a breath that trembled at the end. "You believe in second chances?" "I believe in people who fight for them." The morning they left, the sun rose pale and low over the hills, and the buggy wheels creaked as they turned down the road towards San Antonio. Vera sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, the letter tucked inside her coat. She didn't speak much, but her eyes never stopped moving over the land, the sky, the curve of the road ahead. At the depot, they waited under the shade of a clapboard awning, the train's whistle echoing across the prairie. When the engine hissed to a stop, Vera's breath caught, and she stood without hesitation. A woman stepped off, first, older, gray-haired, leaning heavily on a cane. Behind her, a boy in a patched coat and scuffed boots clutched a small burlap sack and blinked into the light. Vera knelt. "Nolan," she said. The boy looked at her, uncertain for a moment. Then he broke into a run. She caught him against her chest, arms wrapped tight, her face buried in his hair. He clung to her, silent, but his fingers dug into her dress like he meant to never let go. Pierce stood back, watching. He didn't move until Vera looked up at him, tears shining on her cheeks. Then she stood, her hand on Nolan's shoulder. "This is Pierce," she said. The boy looked up, eyes guarded. Pierce crouched, not too close. "You like horses?" Nolan gave a small nod. "We've got 3. One of 'em's stubborn as a mule, but I think you could handle him." Nolan blinked. "Really?" "Really." Vera laid her hand on Pierce's arm. "We're ready." As they rode back toward the hills, Nolan between them on the buggy bench, Pierce glanced over and saw something in Vera's face he hadn't seen before. Not hope. Not relief. Belonging. Nolan took to the ranch like rain takes to thirsty earth. He was quiet at first, but he followed Vera everywhere she went, his small boots kicking up chalky dust between the stones. He kept a wooden horse Pierce had whittled for him in the buggy tucked into his coat pocket, pulling it out whenever he stopped walking, running his thumb along its smooth back like it was a talisman. One afternoon, he stood on a stool beside Vera at the wash basin, sleeves rolled and arms deep in suds. When Pierce passed by, Nolan turned with a serious expression. "Do you have a dog?" "No," Pierce said. "Never found one that didn't chase the cattle." Nolan looked thoughtful. "I keep it from chasing." Vera glanced over her shoulder, then back to the soap. "He's been asking about names," she said. "For things he hasn't seen yet." Pierce leaned on the doorframe. Let's show him the creek tomorrow. That night, Nolan fell asleep in the cot beside the hearth, clutching the horse in one hand and a wool blanket in the other. Pierce stood in the doorway and watched Vera brush the hair from her son's brow. He's lighter, Pierce said. He wakes up and doesn't ask where I've gone, she whispered. That's new. She turned to him, her eyes tired but not worn. I want to build him a space of his own, she said. Not just a cot. A room. Even if it's small. We'll raise the frame come spring. I can help. I know. They didn't speak more that night. The fire was low and the silence comfortable, and when Vera finally took Pierce's hand, it was with the kind of ease that came from having nothing to prove. A few days later, they rode out to the far pasture where the creek curved through stands of sycamore. Nolan rode in front of Pierce, gripping the saddle horn with both hands, his eyes wide at the sight of the water skimming over stone. There are frogs, he said, pointing. They'll sing louder come dusk, Pierce told him. Vera laid out bread and cheese on a cloth near the bank, and Nolan crouched beside the water, trying to coax minnows into his cupped hands. You were right, Vera said as she handed Pierce a piece of bread. He belongs here. Pierce tore the bread in half. So do you. She didn't answer right away. Then she shifted her gaze toward Nolan. Do you know I almost didn't come west, she said. I had the ticket in my hand, packed and ready, and I stood in the depot for an hour before I stepped onto the train. What made you do it? I thought about what staying meant. Another year washing other people's clothes, lying to Nolan about letters that never came. I couldn't do it anymore. Pierce watched her carefully. You never told me what you were most afraid of. She turned her head, watching Nolan skip a stone. Losing again, she said. You get used to struggle. But losing hope, that's different. You're not losing anything now. She met his eyes. I know. That's what scares me. You don't have to wait for something to go wrong. Vera looked down at her hands. I don't know how to stop. Pierce reached over and took one of her hands, turning it palm up. Her skin was calloused at the edges, the lines worn deep. You will, he said. You already are. That night, Nolan climbed into Vera's lap without asking, curling into her chest like it was the only place he ever meant to be. Pierce sat nearby, mending a canvas strap, watching the fire catch in the copper threads of her hair as she hummed a tune he didn't recognize. Later, when Nolan was asleep again, Vera stepped out onto the porch and Pierce followed. You remember what you asked me? She said, her voice low. About what I pictured? I do. I didn't tell you all of it. She looked past the hills, at the dark line where the trees met the sky. I pictured a man who didn't need to fix me, just one who'd stand beside me and let me try. Pierce stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. I never wanted to fix you, he said. I just wanted to make sure you stayed standing. She turned to face him, the wind lifting the edge of her collar. I love you, she said, not because you saved me, but because you didn't ask me to be anyone else. Pierce didn't answer with words. He kissed her, slow and certain, and when she leaned into him, it wasn't with hesitation, it was with all the weight of a woman who had carried too much for too long and had finally found solid ground. They stood like that as the stars came out. Inside, Nolan stirred once and then settled again, and the wind moved through the cottonwoods like a hush that meant everything was finally safe. By mid-June, the days leaned long and warm, and the cicadas had begun their steady song in the trees past the barn. Vera stood on the ladder beside the half-framed addition they were building off the east side of the house, hammer in hand, sweat beading along her brow. She drove the nail clean through the plank and glanced down where Pierce steadied the frame. He's going to want a window, she said, to see the stars at night. Pierce looked up. Then we'll cut one in before we set the studs. She nodded, climbing down with careful steps. Nolan sat a few yards away in the grass with a length of string and a bent nail, dragging it through the dirt like he was plowing a field. I told him it's not ready yet, she said, brushing sawdust from her skirt. He asked if he could sleep in it anyway. Said he'd bring his own blanket. Pierce chuckled low in his chest. He's got your grit. Vera tugged off her gloves. He's got your steadiness. They stood close, the scent of sun-warmed pine thick around them. Pierce reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing over hers. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what comes next. About what we make together." She watched him carefully. "You mean beyond the walls and roof?" "Beyond all of it," he said. "I want your name beside mine on this land. I want to build more than just a room for your boy. I want to build the rest of our lives." Vera didn't look away. "You asking me to be your wife?" "I am." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the cautious kind she'd worn in the early days, but one that settled deep in her. "Yes," she said, "because I already am, in all the ways that matter." They didn't send for a preacher. There wasn't one close enough who could come before the hay needed cutting and the roof needed shingling. So they stood in the pasture on a Sunday morning, Vera in a clean calico dress with her mother's brooch pinned at the throat, Pierce with his sleeves rolled and his father's watch in his pocket. Nolan stood between them, holding a ring carved from juniper, the bark still faintly fragrant. "I brought it in early spring," Pierce said, slipping it onto her finger. "Before I knew how much I'd want to give it to you." Vera took his hand, her voice steady. "Then I'll wear it into every season after this." They kissed with the sun rising over the ridge and Nolan clapping his hands, bouncing with the kind of joy only children know. The weeks that followed were full with small things, chickens that needed fencing, an old pump that finally gave out, a calf born too early that Vera sat beside through the night, refusing to let it slip away. Pierce watched her work and rest and carry Nolan on her hip when the boy fell asleep under the trees. One night, after the new room was finished and Nolan had finally moved into his own bed, Vera lit a lantern and pulled out a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. "I started it before I left St. Louis," she said, laying it across the table. "Didn't think I'd ever finish." It was a quilt pieced from old shirts and flour sacks, sewn with stitches that varied in size and neatness. In the center was a square of deep blue, a child's coat, cut carefully. "I saved what he outgrew," she said. "Said I might need it one day." Pierce ran his hand over the fabric. "You made something lasting. I want it on our bed," she said, "to remind me how far we've come." That night, with the quilt spread over them and the wind brushing soft against the shutters, Vera wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "You made space for us when you didn't have to." Pierce kissed her temple. "I never wanted anything else." She breathed into his chest. "I know." Years passed, but no part of their life grew hurried. Vera taught Nolan to read by lamplight, sounding out each word from a book they bartered for with eggs and soap. Pierce showed him how to set fence posts straight, how to tell when a storm carried hail, how to listen for the cough of a sick calf before it worsened. They added another room when Nolan turned 9, his legs too long for the narrow bed. Vera planted blackberries along the fence line, and Pierce built a small pen for the runt pig Nolan took a liking to. Every evening they sat on the porch, the three of them watching the sky shift from gold to violet. Nolan would nod off sometimes, his head against Vera's side, and she'd run her fingers through his hair until his breathing evened. One night, years after that first broken stagecoach ride, Vera sat beside Pierce beneath the stars, her hand in his, her hair streaked now with silver. "This isn't the life I thought I'd find," she said. Pierce looked out over the fields. "No? It's better." They sat without speaking, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. The land stretched wide before them, the house warm behind them, and the boy they'd raised sleeping soundly inside. They had come through hardship, not untouched, but unbroken. And now they had peace, not because it had been granted, but because they had built it nail by nail, word by word, day after day. Together.